Hey guys, it's Sunny Brigham here. It's Tuesday, so we're back for Tuesday Talks, as we are every night. It was right before I hit start. I don't know if you can hear this. I was joking because my chair is like super I don't know, just the back's really spongy and it just sounds really funny. So I don't know. Oh, and I never get my fingers right. So this right here, my husband painted that. Doesn't that look amazing? I said I wanted a pretty picture for the background when I'm doing my videos, since I now have a space instead of doing them kind of out in the rest of the house. And so I found a picture that I liked, and he goes, I can paint that. And so sure enough, he painted it. He got his little easel and pulled all of his little paint kits set out he got in kindergarten and started painting it for me. And he threw some glitter on it because I love glitter, and so there's nice glitter on it, and so I love it. It looks beautiful, and I can't stop staring at it. Okay, so if you're joining me for the first time tonight, my name is Sunny Brigham, and I'm a board-certified clinical and integrative nutritionist, and I'm trying to slow down when I say that because I say it so often, I say it so fast. Somebody's going to say hi. Can you say hi? No. This is Captain Beauregard Wigglepants. If you've never met him before, he's the love of my life. He's my little baby boy. My husband's over there going, oh, figures. He's just so cute. You can't not cuddle him. So anywho, like I said, I'm Sunny Brigham. I'm a board-certified clinical and integrative nutritionist. And tonight we are talking saturated fat and genetics. This is a pretty interesting topic just because I feel that genetics is just not something that we think about often. Let me take that back. I feel like people think about it, but possibly at the wrong times or with the wrong concerns. We don't really think about genetics when we think about saturated fat, and hopefully I'm going to change that for you guys tonight. And so Deborah Brigham, who's my mother-in-law, she said, wow, Matthew finished the picture. Looks great. Hey, Sunny, it does look amazing, doesn't it? I'm really excited with how it turned out. And Kim said, there he is again. Kisses, kisses. Yes, he's my little baby boy. I know. I always said that I would never talk baby to a dog, and I do. And then I feel like I've turned into that person. I send pictures of my dog all the time to my kids, and I'm pretty sure they hate it. I just sent like several photos earlier of them to the kids, and so I am that person. That's kind of where I'm at in life. Okay, so as we talk about fat, and genes, if you have any questions about any of the information that I am spewing out of my mouth hole, go ahead and post them in the comments below, and I will make sure that I answer them while we are live on air. And if you are watching this after the fact, post your comments, and I do monitor the comment section, so I'll make sure that I get back in here and answer them for you, because I want to make sure that everybody gets the information that they're looking for when it comes to sat fat. Okay, so if you haven't read the blog yet, he's pawing at me because I stopped petting him. If you haven't read the blog yet, I linked it. No, I didn't link it today. I will go back and link it. I was in a hurry to hit the start button. So I'll go back and link it so that you guys, if you haven't read the blog yet, you have the opportunity to read the blog, because I don't talk about everything that's in the blog, every little teeny bit of information. What I do is I just kind of give a, down dirty rundown of the overview of what I think is super important. And so when we talk saturated fats, we're going to talk about a couple of genetic mutations. We're going to talk about ApoE4, which I've talked about before, and we're going to talk about an obesity gene called the FTO. And it's a pretty, not common one, but it's one that's really gaining a lot of traction. They're doing a lot of research on it right now. So it is pretty interesting information. Okay, so let's talk about the FTO gene first. So you don't really need to have, just like I talked about last week with caffeine, you don't need to have your genetic profile to know whether or not you are sensitive to caffeine. All you have to do is listen to your body. If you get the shakes right after 1 cup of caffeine, you should probably stop there. But if you can drink caffeine late in the night and go to sleep no problem, then you're probably a fast metabolizer. And so this is the same bit, right? You don't really need to know if you carry the FTO gene. you can look at your family. So if you look at your relatives and you see fairly lean people, or if they were kind of midlife 30s, 40s, 50s, and were lean at that time, there's a good chance you probably don't carry the FTO gene. But if you look around at your family and everybody's a little bit bigger boned, everybody's a little heavier set, there's a good indication you might carry the FTO gene. But again, if you have access to your 23andMe raw data or your Ancestry DNA raw data, you can always look for the FTO gene. If you're searching, the RS number is in the blog. Like I said, I'll go back and link it, but it's 9939609. And so what we're looking for is you want to have the TT, so the letters next to it. TT means that you don't have the FTO gene activated. TA means you're heterozygous, and AA means you're homozygous. And just as a recap, heterozygous means you carry 1 mutated copy, homozygous means you carry 2 mutated copies. So here's why this matters. High intake of saturated fat can flip the switch on that gene. So if you're a carrier of that gene and it's not expressed, meaning you're pretty happy with your weight, you're not overweight, you're not battling obesity, you're not struggling to lose weight or maintain a specific weight, you can eat a fairly good diet and exercise, and you're not really concerned about your weight, which I think is amazing. But if you eat a high saturated fat diet and you're a carrier, either heterozygous or homozygous, you can flip that switch on so that mutation is activated and you will start gaining weight. And so this is why keeping our saturated fat intake low is good for so many reasons. But when we talk about obesity, it can flip your obesity switch and start causing you to gain weight where maybe we don't want to gain weight. Let's see. And if the gene is already active, high saturated fat intake is just going to make it worse. So it's just going to make you gain weight. And this is what I see often, and we're going to talk more about this diet in a minute. And I'm rolling my eyes because I've been pretty vocal about my dislike for the keto diet, and I think this one's just another hit in the bucket for it. The ketogenic diet really boasts, high saturated fat, so high animal fat, so lots of animal protein, dairy, cheese, because it's a high fat diet. They're not promoting things like eat plenty of salmon, lots of nuts and seeds. They're really hitting hard the full fat dairy and the cheeses as sources of dietary fat. Those things are loaded with saturated fat. So if you've got somebody that's overweight and they are struggling to lose weight and they say, well, Bob did the keto diet and he lost a shit ton of weight, I'm going to go on the keto diet, and it doesn't work for the person that's trying it, but it worked for Bob, it's going to come down to genetics. Okay, so let's talk about, let's see what else I have in here. So I talked about LDLs, but I don't really think that's super duper important. Saturated fat can raise your LDLs. Saturated fat, and I think this comes from inflammation more than anything, because so saturated fat does not lead to heart attack or atherosclerosis, which is hardening the arteries or anything like that. Research tells us it doesn't, right? So research tells us that saturated fat diet is not going to lead to a heart attack, whereas people thought so, 20, 30 years ago. But what it will do is that because saturated fat typically is pretty high in animal product tends to be inflammatory to the body, and high saturated fat intake can increase your LDLs. So I have also seen this. I've had people come to me that did the keto diet and their cholesterol raised. So not just good cholesterol, but their bad cholesterol. So their LDL went like through the roof, as did their total cholesterol, and it really drove up their cholesterol ratio. And so this is kind of something to think about in reference to cholesterol, is that saturated fat should probably be kept low as well. A big contributor of, so a lot of people think that, well, I'll just go on a plant-based diet and that'll lower my LDLs. You can still consume inflammatory foods on a plant-based diet. Hello, sugar. And then there's plant-based sources of food that have high saturated fat intake as well, like coconut oil and palm oil. Both of those are very high in saturated fat. Nuts and seeds have a little bit of saturated fat, nothing that's, ridiculously high amount. But just doing a plant-based diet doesn't mean that you're magically going to be healed of everything, because there's still, crap food in a plant-based diet if you're not really good about what you're consuming. And then we've got, let's see, saturated fat in the ketogenic diet, like I said. So, it's just, I'm just internally pondering the keto diet. I apologize. So aside from, the thyroid issues that I've talked about in the past with the ketogenic diet, and then we talked about the cholesterol concerns, so driving up your LDLs. And what if you already have elevated cholesterol, LDLs or elevated total cholesterol, and you go on a high saturated fat diet? It's just going to push it up even more. And so what we also don't think about in terms of genetics is Alzheimer's. And so I've talked about this in the past. So saturated fat can cause if you are an ApoE4 gene carrier, it can cause cholesterol in the brain to become oxidized. And so that's when you're basically creating a breeding ground for Alzheimer's. And so I'm an ApoE4 carrier, so I really make sure that I lower not only my saturated fat, but I try to keep my total fat low. So if and again, you don't need genetics to know if you're an ApoE4 carrier. You can look at your family history. So if you have Alzheimer's in your family history, there's a good chance you're probably an ApoE4 carrier. Now you can develop Alzheimer's without having the ApoE4 gene, but if you have the ApoE4 gene, there's a greater chance that you can develop Alzheimer's later on in life. Doesn't mean that you will, as long as you take care of your body and your diet's good and you continue to exercise. It just means that you have an elevated risk. My grandfather on my mother's side had Alzheimer's, and so when I look at my genetics, I am an ApoE4 carrier. Matthew, my husband, his grandmother on his mother's side had Alzheimer's, and he is also an ApoE4 carrier. And so you don't need your genetic profile to know if you are or not, but there are people that are carriers that didn't know if they had Alzheimer's in their family or not. So saturated fat can express the ApoE4 gene as well. These are mutations. It doesn't mean that they are active mutations. It just means they're mutations on your genetic strand. Your lifestyle that you lead right now can flip those genes on or off. And so for me, I do everything that I can to make sure that ApoE4 stays in the off position. So for people that carry the FTO or the obesity gene, should be making sure that they're doing everything to keep that mutation in the off position, which is low saturated fat diet, healthy diet overall, low sugar, lots of plants, those sorts of things. And so when we talk about saturated fat in the diet, you want to keep it at 15% or less. And that doesn't seem like a lot, but when you look at your caloric intake as a whole, this is what it looks like. So if you consume a 2,000 calorie day diet, that's 33 grams of saturated fat. So it's still quite a bit because a calorie is 9 grams. 9 grams, 1 gram of fat is 9 calories. I'm sorry. 9 grams of fat is 1 calorie. And so if you consume a 2,000 calorie day diet, you can have 33 grams of saturated fat. If you consume 1,500 calories, it's 25 grams of saturated fat. If you consume higher than 2,000 calories, but it adds up quick. So 33 grams seems like a lot, right? It adds up pretty quick. So a quarter cup of heavy cream is 14 grams of saturated fat. That's like if you're eating a 1,500 calorie day diet and you like some heavy cream in your coffee in the morning, or you're whipping up an MCT coffee or what do they call it? A bulletproof coffee, which has heavy cream or butter and coconut oil in it or MCT oil. That's a lot of saturated fat right off in the morning. And so if you're trying to shoot for 1,500 calories because maybe you're trying to lose weight and you're really trying to keep that fat low because of the FTO gene, or your cholesterol's high, or maybe you're an ApoE4 carrier and you're making a bulletproof coffee first thing in the morning, you are probably exceeding your entire saturated fat intake for that day just in that morning coffee. A slice of ham, and I misspelled on the blog, I put ham. A slice of ham is 13 grams of saturated fat. 1 tablespoon of coconut oil. So I know a lot of people cook with coconut oil. Just 1 tablespoon, which is like the size of your thumb, is 12 grams of saturated fat. So there's extra fat in there. It's just 12 grams of saturated fat. 3 ounces of ground beef is 9 grams. Lamb has quite a bit. It's 8 grams. And then milk and cheese is probably on the lower end. A cup of whole milk is about 4.5 grams of sat fat. And then 1 slice of cheddar cheese is 6 grams of saturated fat. So it will add up pretty quickly if you're not paying attention to what you're consuming. Again, it's always good to know your genetic profile. If you have access, like if you ever did Ancestry DNA or if you ever did 23andMe, you have access to that information. If you don't have to have that information to eat a low sat fat diet or to look around at your family history or what is happening in your family right now to know whether or not you need to keep saturated fat low. So again, you've got the FTO gene, saturated fat, which is your obesity gene. So saturated fat can flip that mutation on if you're a carrier. So if you're overweight and you're doing everything that you can to lose weight and you can't figure out why the hell the weight's not coming off, you have done everything, you might be an FTO carrier. Doesn't mean that you can't lose weight. It just means that you're going to have to try a lot harder than the average person to lose weight. If you are an ApoE4 carrier or you know that you have Alzheimer's in your family, it's probably a good idea to keep saturated fat low because it can cause the ApoE4 gene to express, and you're creating an environment in the brain with oxidized cholesterol, which is just basically a breeding ground for Alzheimer's. So know your family history if you don't. Look at your genetic profile and always do your best to keep saturated fat low. So that is it. I am off of my, what do we call it? Pedestal, I guess. I don't remember the name of it. So I'm off my,
Soapbox.
Yeah, soapbox. Thank you. I'm off my soapbox. That's what they say in the military. I'm off my soapbox. Let me get off my soapbox. I'm off my soapbox. I'm going to say it one more time. I am off my soapbox for with saturated fat and the ketogenic diet. So if you have any questions, pop them in the comments and I will make sure that I get to them. Let me see. So which ethnic group is low in saturated fat? I have noticed most Cuban food is high in saturated fat. Well, Cuban food is high in saturated fat because it's high in pork and they cook with a lot of lard and tallow, butters. That's kind of where the saturated fat comes in. So there's really no ethnic food group that is going to be specifically low in saturated fat. There are diets that you can follow that are lower in saturated fat. For instance, a plant-based diet is fairly low in saturated fat. The only source of saturated fat in a plant-based diet would be palm oil, coconut oil, or some nuts and seeds. But you would have to, so if you use 2 tablespoons of coconut oil to cook on a plant-based diet, you have exceeded your saturated fat limit for the day. But if you only use 1 tablespoon to cook, and then maybe you have a handful of nuts and seeds throughout the day, you're not going to exceed your saturated fat intake or limit on a plant-based diet. But let's say, you have a couple of eggs for breakfast, which are actually fairly low in saturated fat, but you cook those eggs in butter or coconut oil, and then you have a bulletproof coffee, and then later on you've got a pork sandwich, and then in the evening you have a rack of lamb with some vegetables. That's all. That daily intake is a very high saturated fat daily intake. And so for some people, that doesn't make, a difference whatsoever. But if you're an ApoE4 carrier or you're an FTO carrier, it's probably a good idea to watch the level of saturated fat that you're consuming. Okay. I don't see any other questions. Like I said, post your questions below. I'll make sure that I get to them. I hope you guys have a fabulous, fabulous, fabulous Saturday. No, oh my God, it's not Saturday. Where the hell am I? Tuesday? Yeah, Tuesday. So I hope you have a fabulous Tuesday night, and I will see you guys next week. Same time, same bat channel for Tuesday Talks. Bye.